Welcome. My name is Geena Clonan. I'm the founding president of the Connecticut Women's Hall of Fame. For nearly 3 decades, the Hall has worked to discover and share the stories of women. Our various educational platforms acknowledge the individual and collective feminine voice. There is no more important time than now to talk and listen. This will be a half-hour intimate and informative chat, followed by 15 minutes of your questions, which I encourage you to submit at any time during the webinar by simply clicking the Q&A bubble at the bottom of your screen. We'll try to get to as many as possible. Our goal is simple, a virtual gathering to talk about today's important issues. We hope this will be a useful source of information while offering up some helpful takeaways. Today is the second and final installment of our webinar series called This Historic Pandemic Shesession, whose purpose is to present the findings of a groundbreaking report recently released called Essential Equity: Women, COVID-19, and Rebuilding Connecticut. This report is a collaboration between funders and member organizations of the Connecticut Collective for Women and Girls and the Connecticut Data Collaborative, and was made possible by generous funding from the Aurora Women and Girls Foundation. The Shesession is a term used to explain the historic effect of this pandemic's recession on women, unlike past recessions that affected predominantly men. This week, we're going to focus on how the findings, shocking and disturbing, can be used to address the prevalent inequities. As we learned last week, this report elucidates disparities both familiar and unfamiliar. But regardless of age, gender, or politics, these findings affect everyone. Today's guest holds a Ph.D. and MA in Women and Gender Studies from Emory University and a BA from Wake Forest. She was previously a visiting assistant professor at Trinity College and program manager at Connecticut's Historical Society. As executive director of the Aurora Foundation, she champions its initiatives to strengthen opportunities for women and girls, so evident in its major role in funding the Essential Equity Report. She's no stranger to the Hall and one of our most admired voices in the feminist nonprofit community. Please welcome Dr. Jennifer Stedman.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
It's a pleasure. Well, we'll get right down to the facts. For those unable to attend last week and to refresh the memories of those of us that did, could you give us a brief overview of the key findings of the report?
Sure. So Essential Equity was an astounding collaborative effort. While Aurora is certainly one of the funders, other women's funds around Connecticut came together from Fairfield, Northwest Connecticut, Eastern Connecticut, and New Haven to all financially back the report. But more importantly, we were able to reach out to state agencies through the Governor's Council for Women and Girls, as well as other service providers to get their kind of take on what policies we should advocate for. They were key in developing those. So I think the most important takeaway that we came away with was, one, that women of color were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, that they suffered greater health consequences, that they were suffering greater economic consequences, mental health consequences. And, we were seeing things like 300% increases in SNAP applications, right? So hunger was a major issue impacting, and we knew it was impacting particularly women and their families, right? Because of who was applying for those SNAP benefits and who was calling 211 to ask for help with food insecurity and hunger. I hate the term food insecurity. I'm going to go with hunger, right? Because that's what we're really talking about. Domestic violence was really spiking during the pandemic, right? That calls to Safe Connect, the statewide domestic violence hotline, increased by 30%. Mm-hmm. So we definitely saw terrible impacts on women and girls, but we also saw that women are the drivers of Connecticut's economy, that they're 49% of the workforce, and half of those are essential workers. right? So who are we relying on to make Connecticut's economy run? We're relying on women. And so what we were really advocating for with the report was that relief and recovery efforts really need to center women if they're going to be effective for everyone, right? So Geena, when you're saying this report is relevant to everybody in Connecticut, that's how it's relevant to everyone.
Well, you know as well as I do, there's a very old adage among feminist communities that if you raise a woman, you raise a family, you raise a community, you raise the world. And it's never been truer than now, particularly during the pandemic and the resulting Shesession. I always have trouble getting over that word. So it's clear what surprised you and what didn't, but I guess what strengthened your resolve, you might say, is the fact that women are the driving force, and this reiterated it.
Right. And I have to say that for Aurora, our grant making has focused on building educational and economic opportunities for women. And what we saw, we are particularly focused right now on getting more women in Greater Hartford their college degree by funding supportive programs that help low-income women, women of color, first-generation women college students kind of get the resources they need to navigate higher education. And what we saw was, for the first time, women passed men in unemployment applications. It's the first time ever in Connecticut. And of those women applying for unemployment, 75% of them did not have a college degree. So that if we can build those pipelines, those opportunities, then we know that we've certainly found that women take those opportunities and they run with them, that then they can get access to higher paying careers, right? Ones that are less vulnerable, that have opportunities to work from home, right? It makes a lot of sense to kind of work on helping women get to that place.
Education is key. So just curiously, we're going to move off of the data and I'm going to talk to you more about the resolutions in response to that data. But what's the lifespan of data like that? And in your opinion, has the public been responsive so far?
We've been extremely excited about the response to the report. Data doesn't have a long shelf life. For sure. And so Michelle mentioned it last week, we're already working on plans to think about updating it, to think about, we looked at the first 6 months of the pandemic. Can we provide an update a year out, especially as we start to get some of the relief and recovery money as Connecticut's making some policy decisions? What do those look like for women? Are they as robust as we hope they'd be? I think that's definitely in our plan. As far as the shelf life of data, we were able to produce this report so quickly because Aurora and our other partners around the state have really focused on this idea of making data about women and girls available and accessible in a way that it hasn't been. So we built the Women and Girls Data Platform to have an easy, I nerd out over it so much. It is.
Come on, there are a lot of nerds out there. Tell us more about that. What does that mean?
So it means that all this publicly available data about women and girls is in one place. And it means that nonprofits that serve women and girls, that funders that want to think about how to best serve women and girls, that there's a place where they can go for this data. And so it's beautiful. We have about 7 focus areas, and then it's all of the counties in Connecticut, major cities, and the data visualizations, they change when you change the geography. So it's animated. It's very cool. But because it is.
Go ahead.
Well, and because we had built it, right, we had both the partners and this infrastructure to then do the COVID report. But we also we're excited we recently funded a data literacy training that Connecticut Data Collaborative did for women and girls serving nonprofits. We had 31 nonprofits participate.
Michelle talked about that last week, and it was very exciting. I believe the Connecticut Women's Hall of Fame is one of the participants. So all the staff at our office was very happy to have a workshop like that.
right? So that we can build the capacity of each of those individual organizations. They can use the data to better understand who they're serving, what the needs are, and then they can use that data for grant applications. So we were doing our own grant making last night, and we were on a call with the YW of Hartford, and they had just used the data to secure a big opportunity for them. So
it's groundbreaking and practical. Well, we're still on the subject of data. Thanks to you, I've been made aware, and not everyone has, of the lack of data on women and girls, in particular data that's broken down by gender and race. So tell us why there's been such a lack and why it's so important to address it. And besides the data platform, how can we address it?
well, so in the report itself, working with Connecticut Data Collaborative, they're the real experts about what data is available. But when we first started to build the platform, when you're working with publicly available data, you're working with how the Labor Department collects data, how how all these government agencies think about data. And it's only very recently that they've started to really think about breaking it down by gender and race. So not every topic or idea is broken down in both those ways. Sometimes things are just broken down by race and not by gender. Certainly, we're not at the point where that publicly available data thinks about gender as anything other than binary, right? Anything other than male, female, right? So we that's something that we hope that our work on data starts to push, right? We start, as we work with the Governor's Council for Women and Girls and work with their agencies to get the data, right? It pushes them, right? Our asking, right, starts to help make that change, make that data more.
Awareness is key. The more aware we are, the better we can function. And that goes for entities like nonprofits as well and data collecting agencies. So that's making great progress. So we may move out of this pandemic now or later, hard to say with all the variants, vaccine rollouts, restructuring of the economy, but certainly its effect on women and girls will not move out that quickly. Was all of this project a wake-up call like no other for everyone, or are we likely to take a look and then sweep it under the carpet?
Wow, I would, yeah. I mean, if I had a crystal ball, maybe I would know exactly what we're going to do. I mean, what struck me is that many of these inequities and kind of structural inequality was already in place before the pandemic, right? The pandemic just amplified it, made it worse, made it more visible to some. But for those of us who had already been working on the ground with women and girls, I think we sort of knew in our hearts as soon as this started that women and girls would be hit the hardest. And so a data project like Essential Equity is really about then documenting the harm, right? So that we can take it to decision makers and have this kind of concrete proof that here is, more than we suspected this, we know it, right? So we're hoping that it creates a bigger push to act and make change.
Impact on public policy. So we know that American women lag behind many other countries in societal support of our multiple roles in the home, the workplace, and the community. My next question I wrote some time ago, and it was, will the pandemic realities promote needed changes in parental and childcare, healthcare, flexible schedules, remote tasks? And then there was last night with President Biden's address, which I think I was floored, as I'm sure many of our peers were, by how many directives are centered on women and families, everything, and the underserved communities. He talked about race, gender, poverty, hunger, workforce, equality in so many ways with his plan. So it did give me hope. And I'm sure, can we feel that same hope right here in Connecticut? Are we on the bandwagon to make those changes too?
I think I mean, I am very hopeful. I feel like Connecticut had already been making strides to work towards pay equity, right? To work toward, our family paid medical leave is going to start rolling out. I think that is, really we're leading the country with that effort. So I think there are definitely places where we can be hopeful, and I think there are places where, we have to keep pushing. I think the way that this administration is talking about childcare and caregiving as infrastructure is fascinating and definitely something I don't think we've seen before. Right? I feel like the whole care economy is getting the kind of attention that we hope that it will. So that makes me hopeful.
We have never seen, it does me too. We have never seen or heard of that before, and we've never seen such an incredible backdrop to an address where two women in very high seats in government uh, were there for all of us to see. And as he said, it's about time. It's about time. I think that was great. It seems that more than ever in the pandemic, women were forced to make difficult choices between work and family. And we know that over 2 million women went unemployed. And that may be not the real number because many of them just stop looking or don't get benefits. And yesterday I learned that there was $800 billion in income lost around the world for women from an Oxfam International report. Um, so we often tout choice as a feminist mantra for a variety of issues, but let's face it, most women don't have the luxury of choice. What did the report tell you about choice?
Well, what we saw is that we couldn't fully trace how many Connecticut women were dropping out of the workplace, right? But if we follow national trends of women who who are leaving the workforce to provide the kind of care that we're talking about, right? As we can talk some about the childcare crunch in Connecticut, but if you don't have childcare and you have to stay home, we know that in Connecticut we saw a huge increase in that last September, right? Which coincides right with when school was supposed to start, but didn't quite and was remote. Of parents who left the workforce, I don't think it surprises anybody that 76% of those were women. And when we look at what that means to the larger Connecticut economy, if that stays the way it is right now, we're talking about $150 million to $500 million in just lost wages from the Connecticut economy, from those women unable to participate.
So there we are. Pink collar jobs have not declined, but increased since the term was first coined, particularly among Black, Latina, and Asian women. Can you talk a little bit about their gross burdens in the pandemic, and how do you think they might be helped or protected in the future?
Well, I mean, I think an increased focus on care work and seeing it as an essential service for our society, right?
Can I
Unless,
ask you just more,
Mhm.
what's the definition of care work?
Well, I think well, I mean, for women, right, it goes
Yeah,
much more beyond paid work. But even if
right.
we think about those kinds of caring jobs that do get paid, right, we're thinking about, elder care, child care, um,
Teachers?
teachers, certainly, right? Like if we think about, but I think if we think about particularly childcare and elder care are so underpaid, right? Like those are jobs where you can be working full time and still be considered working poor, right? Still fall within that the United Way's ALICE, asset limited income constrained, I think. Where you're not making enough to meet basic needs. So I think an increased focus on both, right? It's childcare is very difficult, right? Because it's expensive. 80% of Connecticut families cannot afford
Eight?
quality, 80%. And that's everyone. When we look at families of color, it's 94%. Right? Childcare costs as much as college tuition in Connecticut.
Yeah.
So it has been a difficult thing to raise childcare wages, right? Because families can't afford it. But I think that's where policy change can really help, right? Where we direct public money to subsidize that crucial societal need, right?
Exactly.
To have those women then make a living wage. And we were talking earlier this week. We actually had an event with Karen Lott, who runs a fabulous childcare center, and she was talking about the ways in which you have to support her mostly women of color staff, and they in turn raise this next generation of kids, right, to then be better prepared for school, better able to overall succeed, right, to lift our whole society.
Well, let's hope that along with the increase in the minimum wage, which of course will be great news for women, that the child tax credits also adding money to the budget every year for care. So let's hope that we can get those programs up and running. Let's talk a little bit again, not about the data, but in reference to the data. It was related to gender equality, but beyond the reality that we have major disparities in access to a quality different programs, we have them among women ourselves. What did this report tell you about both of those? You've touched on it a little.
Well, I think, what we see are these continuing disparities between white women and women of color, right? That they, in terms of earnings, in terms of access to these other opportunities that we're talking about, educational opportunities, leadership opportunities, right? And I think as that becomes increasingly evident that to make larger social change, that we're going to have to start to address those inequities.
And it's important to note that because we often think of white privilege in terms of men. We talk about all white men, white presidents, white things on the wall, but it's important for all of us in society to recognize that white privilege is not gender specific.
Right. And that we have fabulous leaders, women of color that are waiting to lead in their communities, that are just need tools and opportunities. And then I think we'll see some dramatic change happen.
So, as a result of the pandemic and the societal shifts it's produced, what do you think are the biggest or the most in need of attention in terms of the equality gaps right here in Connecticut?
I think housing is going to be a huge issue. We have the eviction moratorium in place right now, even though some evictions are actually going forward despite that moratorium.
When is that moratorium set to end?
I think the end of April. So yeah, so what we see from the data is that particularly women of color, single heads of households, right, are really struggling to pay their rent. And once they, once they're evicted, that then ruins their credit, the tremendous expense of moving from homelessness, right, to being housed, just has these kind of devastating economic and social impacts. And so it seems to me that, not just to me, but to the data, that if we can invest in making sure that those evictions don't happen, then we're actually saving the state a huge amount of money that would have to go into services, once those evictions happen. And really, we need to be building more affordable housing.
Of course. And is there anything presently in front of the legislature or anything regarding the potential eviction notices that will fall at the end of the month? And pardon me.
I know that there are a couple of things that they're looking at, and what I'm finding in in reaching out to talk to some of the, particularly the Connecticut Fair Housing, is there's money coming from the federal level, and then there's a big bottleneck in getting it to the people who need it. So I think there's going to have to be some, I know there's some legislation right now about making sure, trying to get everybody counsel that is facing eviction, right? So that should have a significant effect, right? Should be a real way to stop some of that, some of the most extreme effects of the
To
housing
build
crisis.
awareness about where you can go for help? Is that what you mean?
So no, so that you would have like almost like a public defender who would be with you in housing court. So right now, most tenants aren't represented, and the landlords all have lawyers, right? Is how the system works right now. So they're working hard to try and get funding for essentially like
Balance
housing.
that ratio so you can have
Yeah.
equal representation
Yeah.
about something so dire as the roof over your head.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
important.
So I want to remind everyone, we're approaching the 1:00 hour, which is where we open it up to questions. So please, if you have a question for Dr. Stedman, please put it in the Q&A box and we'll get to as many as we can. So before we close, so this was a great initiative. It's available to nonprofits. Are those then the boots on the ground that are making it, putting it in the eyes of those who make the public policy changes to address the issues? Or how does that work? You've done a great thing, a big collaborative. It's there, the data's there. Where's it moving?
Well, so we were so super excited because we worked with the Women's Caucus of Connecticut's legislature and did a special briefing for them. So we were really thrilled that they invited us to come and share the data. So that was a great way to get it to legislators. And we are actually working, a great partner with us is the Connecticut Women's Education and Legal Fund. And so we're in the process of working with them and reaching out to each of also all of Connecticut's statewide representation. So we just met with Chris Murphy's office this week. We've got asks out to all the congresspeople and other Senate offices so that we can, right, because the nonprofits are busy doing their work. It's not necessarily their job. So we're trying to help with that and make sure that we do the push out to as many decision makers as we can.
Well, that's amazing, because then it means that it's not just a study that sits on a shelf and goes down in history, because it is pretty historic, but you are actually disseminating that information to the people who need it the most. And if I were not in a nonprofit for women and girls that dealt with particularly education, I would not have known about this project. I might be sitting in an office somewhere. I might be a landlord. I might be, in any position across the state that deals directly with women and children and not know about it. So I think it's fantastic that you and your partner in this endeavor are getting it out there, making people aware of it.
Well, and I think we're trying to think of decision makers in really broad ways too. Aurora was really excited. We were just invited. We presented at the Gates Foundation Greater Giving Summit. So a big piece of that presentation was both our grant making and but the COVID-19 research project, and our subsequent, we did a COVID rapid response fund. So getting to those big national tables to kind of talk about why this kind of research is vital to communities everywhere was very exciting opportunity too.
I also want you to take this moment to toot your own horn, because I know that Connecticut and this kind of study, the study that you and all your peers were engaged in of last year, was at the forefront. I mean, we're way ahead of other states. and gathering this kind of information. So take a bow.
It was exciting. Once when we were doing it, our heads were down. We were just trying to get to the beginning of the legislative session. We had that as our deadline. And then we sort of looked around and realized that because of the partnerships that we built, because of the infrastructure we built, that we really were able to respond quickly in an important way. So that did feel pretty good.
It is. And I think it's important to think what you just said about getting this information. We think, oh, public policy, trust the legislature. But when you're talking about large foundations, philanthropic entities, businesses
Mhm.
can affect many of these issues that we just talked about, looking into the women and that work for them, and maybe some of the issues that they are facing that we often don't talk about in the workplace, and particularly now when the workplace is so remote, they're not as easily identifiable. So it's important that this study gets into the hands of all kinds of different leaders in our state and around the country.
Yep, that's definitely the way that we feel, and certainly all of Aurora's corporate partners, and really anyone we could think of, we were sending the report to as much as we could.
Right. That's great. So, as Connecticut women, what can we do to get the help we need if we're among those who need it? And what about those who don't need it? What can we do to help?
So actually, for women who are experiencing effects of the pandemic, probably the best place to start is calling 211. They can refer you to everything from food resources to we were meeting with a student in one of our college success programs, and she had gotten to that program by calling 211, which was,
Really?
yeah.
Tell our viewers what 211 is.
Oh, so 211 is essentially an information hotline that's staffed. United Way certainly helps to provide it, but it connects you out to all kinds of support services. So I would think that that's probably a good place to start.
And it's not gender specific. 211 is
No,
information about anything you need in the state, right?
yes,
A great
exactly.
resource. I have a question here. What suggestions could you think of to promote this data at a state level? I'm asking because I read and hear a lot of how the pandemic has affected Blacks and minorities, but specific women. I think it ends there. So I think we might have answered this question, but let's repeat it because that just came in.
So, so yeah, we're thinking of lots of ways. Both, we did do a big media campaign around the report. We hosted a live session with women who were actually impacted that you can find on our website and watch, but we had 200 people tune in to that Zoom. And we've been placing op-eds. We've been, working to get it out to individual corporations who sponsor various women's organizations within the Connecticut Collective for Women and Girls, that statewide network.
Well, we're all partners in this, and I want to remind all our guests today that this too will be an educational program to live in perpetuity at cwhf.org. I want to thank you for coming today and for all that you do with Aurora. We go back a ways. I'm sure it's an appropriate time for me to mention Eileen Krause, who we miss every day and who was a big part of both of our organizations. So we will be forever connected in her memory and the work that she did right here in Connecticut. She would be so proud of us both. And a very special thanks to the William and Alice Mortensen Foundation and the Avangrid Foundation for their support of this webinar series, A Conversation Between. And to all of you who joined, thanks for being part of our family. Our educational programs are free for women and girls here at home and everywhere that internet is available. We do this with your financial support. So please give a little, give a lot at cwhf.org. And join me next month, the month of May, when we honor moms as they talk about the struggles of this pandemic year and how they coped or didn't. Until then, stay healthy, stay happy. Thank you, Jennifer. I look forward to the next time we can work together.
Thank you so much.